You ever imagine when game developers are in a meeting and they're like, you know that one game we made? Let's do that again. This is called a game remake, where game developers go and remake a game. Wow, call me Webster. But it's not just when a publisher simply re-releases their game. There's different terms used to describe a re-release depending on the extent of how much it's changed. There's ports, where the game gets a version for another platform, and in most cases the only thing changed are to adapt to that new platform. Then there's remasters, where the core game is unchanged, but it gets a glow up in terms of graphics like improved lighting and textures. And then you have the most ambitious of them all, remakes, where they straight up make the game a second time. They'll use the original as reference and maintain its story beats, characters, mechanics, and so on, but from there, they'll rework the graphics, improve the gameplay, modernize the soundtrack, basically making an old game feel brand new. But why would game publishers want to go through making a game they've already made before? It seems like a waste of resources and time when they could make a new game instead, but there's some good reasons as to why games get remakes. 1. The game is old. Ocarina of Time, for instance, is a highly beloved game, but mostly beloved by people born around the 90s, and most kids in a later generation won't be able to experience this game. So if you remake this game on the newest console, the young'uns will also be able to experience this old game and further carry on its legacy. 2. The game is kinda shit. Okay, that's kinda harsh. I really just mean that old games inherently come with a lot of jankiness and cut corners given to limited technology back then. Like some of these games, it's a miracle they're in a playable state, so modernizing the game will allow it to live up to modern day standards. Or 3. Fan service. Really the biggest reason why games are remade is because they're popular among their fans, and so they're just made to appeal to the nostalgia of their older audience, and I can't deny that it's pretty effective. So with these points in mind, what would be my ideal game to remake? For me, I think of one of my favorite game series, Paper Mario. I haven't had the chance to talk about it on my channel, but I love the Paper Mario series. It's super charming from its appealing art style, fun characters, and focusing a lot more on story than other Mario games would. It also makes turn-based combat actually fun. Well, for me, at least. It simplifies it a lot, so it's easier to understand by working with very low numbers, which makes every number feel significant. So it's a great entry point to the RPG genre due to how simple it is, yet it's still fun thanks to all the action commands you can pull off. And because of all this, the first Paper Mario ended up being one of my favorite games. Although this title seems to be universally liked by Paper Mario fans, it's the consecutive games where things get a bit divisive. Because throughout this series, you'll see that Nintendo just can't decide what to do with this thing. They go from traditional RPG to a 2D platformer, only to go back to turn-based combat but replace the appeal of the original with resource management, and then finally goes for something in the middle with mixed results. But despite the games being so different from each other, I actually like every entry in this series. I think each one succeeds in their own unique way. Except for this one, this is abysmal dogshit. Although I like their newest title a lot, I was starting to feel the itch to get a new Paper Mario with the same direction as the original. But I imagine that Nintendo had already made up their mind about this series. Paper Mario is going to be less RPG, more action game, whether we like it or not. So imagine how shocked I and everyone else was when at the end of the Nintendo Direct of September 2023, we saw this.
Ooh, what the? What are you talking about? Down to your door!
They announced a remake for the most popular entry in the series, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. This caught everyone off guard because of how much they tried to deviate from the classic Mario RPGs. It felt like they tried to ignore that this game even existed from how bold it was. But with this alongside the remake for Super Mario RPG, it looks like they're starting to hear us out. They're finally appreciating the legacy of their older RPGs instead of feeling ashamed of them for whatever reason. So no matter how good or bad this remake was gonna be, its existence is pretty meaningful. Now I will admit, I was a bit mixed at first because Paper Mario 64 being my favorite game, I wanted that to get a remake, so I was a bit let down when they skipped to the sequel instead. But once I got my hands on it, I ended up being so glad they chose this one, because I now believe that Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door for Nintendo Switch is one of the best remakes of all time. Not one of the best games period, but as far as remakes go, it's a shining example of what a game remake should aspire to be. Just from a conceptual view, if you look at my points from earlier on when a remake served its purpose, it checks all the boxes, and what we ended up getting blew away my already high expectations. And I want to get into exactly how in this video. How the Nintendo Switch remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door respects, improves, and expands upon its Gamecube counterpart. In other words, you're gonna hear me waffle about Paper Marcus for a good minute, so strap in. But before we get to the Switch remake, I want to discuss my thoughts on the original Thousand-Year Door on the Gamecube.
Is what I like to call
The Nintendo shit cube.
Now, despite playing a lot of Paper Mario 64 and Super Paper Mario as a kid, I never got to play the one in the middle for a long time. I was able to play it since we had a Wii, but I guess we never got around to buying the game. But once I was old enough and had a concept of money, I finally got around to purchasing and playing the game, which from what I've heard is the best in the series. And so I finished the game and was like, yeah, that was pretty good. But I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece. Now when it comes to being a sequel, Thousand Year Door is excellent in that regard, expanding the world and game mechanics we've learned to love in the N64 game. The best part of this game has to be the story, what might be the best story to come out of a Mario game. Mario has to go on a grand old treasure hunt for these crystal stars, racing against this weird alien cult called the X-Nauts, who want to use them to awaken a demon that will start the apocalypse. Yeah, that's a big leap from
Bowser is coming.
This game is rich with lore and world building, telling us about this ancient town that got destroyed 1,000 years ago, and how the crystal stars were used to seal the demon behind this magic door. Yeah, 1004 was a wild year, you just had to be there. You slowly piece together what lurks behind the door and what's the motive for the X-Nauts throughout the story, surrounding the whole adventure with mystery and speculation as you learn more and more. It's great. And the Thousand Year Door also has to have the most creative ideas from Mario levels. You know the hub world, the place you revisit throughout the game that's all comforting and feels like your home? Well, the hub world here is Rogueport, an actual shithole. There's trash and graffiti everywhere, muggings, skulls on pikes. It really reminds me of Burbank. This game is not afraid to be a little edgy, but it does it in its own charming Mario fashion, and I love it for that. And the bold new concepts don't stop there, because we also get to explore a monochromatic forest with abstract imagery, a floating city in the sky with a fighting ring, train. I like the train. It's a big step from the sandy deserts and snowy snowlands you'd expect from a Mario game. And each of these areas all have their own unique narrative, where really, these could all be from different games. From helping a tribe of dollar store Pikmin take back their tree from the X-Nauts, to making your way up the ranks of a fighting tournament, slowly trying to solve the mystery behind the anonymous messages and missing fighters. And throughout this adventure, you meet all kinds of memorable characters. The X-Nauts are goofy yet mysterious. The 3 shadows that work for the X-Nauts are also fun, and the 3 bring both funny but mostly kinda sad interactions between each other. But my favorite character in this game has to be Bowser. He is easily the funniest he's ever been. In the first game, we've seen him at his most successful, defeating Mario at the beginning and taking all necessary precautions to make sure he can't take back the Star Spirits. But here, he's suffering from peaking in high school. He tries to get the Crystal Stars before Mario, but everything goes wrong for him and it's hilarious. As for the partners you get throughout the adventure, it's a massive step up from 64. As much as I like that game, I can't say the partners were their strong suit. You got some memorable ones like Goombario and Bo, but then there's Cooper. You see, Cooper wants to be an explorer like his idol and has a red bandana. Only like 30 minutes later you meet Bombette, who is girl. What? Baby? Yeah, they really feel less like layered characters and more like tools to solve puzzles. The partners in the Thousand Year Door, on the other hand, excel both in personality and utility. You have Goombella, an archaeologist and a college student who's 75,000 coins in debt. You also got Koops. I like him. He's a little socially awkward goofball who probably has Discord Nitro. And then there's Admiral Bobbery, a sea navigator who's suffering from guilt of believing he was responsible for his wife's death, swearing to never set sail again, who learns that doing so would mean that he would lose both loves of his life and learns to overcome his grief. There's also a mouse that sexually harasses you. On top of being more interesting characters is the fact that they're also much more distinct in combat, all having vastly unique moves where they all serve purposes for specific context. And I ended up swapping through all the partners consistently, while in the first game I just sorta stuck with the same 3. The battle system in this game is easily the best it's been in this series. It feels like a natural evolution of the combat from the N64 game. I will admit, 64's combat is a bit too simple at times, where battles can be a bit boring and repetitive, especially since you can't even do action commands for the first hour of the game. I guess it's to be expected since this is supposed to be baby's first turn-based RPG, but the Thousand Year Door is when the babies become potty trained because it adds some more complex mechanics, such as peer pressure. You now have an audience watching your fights, so you gotta make sure you don't disappoint. Not only do you have to make sure you pull off moves successfully, but you also can perform stylish poses during your moves to impress your audience even more. Doing so will give you star power for special moves and grow your audience. but screwing up will cause people to leave or drive them to kill you with hammers. I like this mechanic a lot since it urges you to do better and the stylish moves gives you more input during your attacks. But my favorite addition has to be super guarding. Now you could just block the attacks and reduce the damage by pressing A at the right time, or if you press B at a more strict time, you'll counter the attack and the enemy will take damage. So you gotta decide if you want to play it safe and take reduced damage, or risk it all and try not to take any damage. You can never go wrong with risk and reward mechanics, and going for super guards makes combat a lot more exciting. I believe combat is when the 1000-Year Door is at its most fun. And that's pretty much the gist of this game. It has an intriguing story, unique locations, fun characters, and a combat system that expands upon the first game yet maintains its simplistic charm. So, how come I don't see this as the masterpiece that many Paper Mario fans see this as? Well, the game itself is kinda poorly designed. Now don't get me wrong, the story and set pieces are really investing, but the way this game is designed really hinders the experience a lot for me. I guess I should start with the level design. Or should I say hallway design? Many of the locations are made up of screens where you go from left to right until you get a new objective where you either go right to left or left to right in the background layer. And they're pretty linear to where there's really not any room to explore. At times the Z-axis doesn't really seem necessary. 64 was a lot better at giving you a world to explore. Take a look at each game's Chapter 1. In 1000-Year Door, you have a pipe to the castle at the beginning, but other than that, it's a straight line to Petalburg and Schwank Fortress. 64's Chapter 1 is also pretty much a straight line, but would you look at that? Two different paths were in one Lisa Koopa village and the other Koopa's fortress. It's at least a little bit open. Comparing their Chapter 5s is much more drastic. Jade Jungle is super open and tricky to navigate with each bit of land being separated by water. While in Keel Hall Key, you start at the beach, walk to the right for a few screens with some platforming, and there's the Pirate's Grotto. Yeah, it's about as exciting as the no internet dinosaur game. Hell, 64 actually has you go north and south. In 1000-Year Door, I can't count the amount of loading zones that don't face east or west with one hand. The world doesn't really feel connected either. Most of the chapters are loosely connected to Rogueport by just going through a pipe. And when it's not a pipe, it's a mode of transportation that takes you far from Rogueport. 64 was a lot better at its map design because Toad Town really felt like it was in the center of everything. I mean, you literally walk from town to chapters 1 and 3. But if you take a look at the map from the 1000-Year Door, I don't know, it feels less like a world map and more like one of those children's playmats. It's a real shame because the linear and sometimes frustrating overworld gameplay really hinders my courage to see the story to the end. In Chapter 3, I really like the parts where we're trying to solve the mysteries of the Glitz Pit and eventually find out who's behind the missing fighters and the mysterious messages. But most of the chapter you just do battles over and over. It gets really repetitive and the battle theme starts to get pretty grating. But then again, the whole chapter revolves around the fighting ring, so it's to be expected. Some of these other chapters, however, have no excuse being how they are. Chapter 5 seems like a really fun pirate adventure and Barbary offers some emotional weight. But the first half of the chapter has you go back and forth between the base and the Pirate's Grotto. You see, we first have to find Bobbery in front of the Pirate's Grotto, but once you do, he's dying and says he needs a Coke Zero. So we go back to camp to ask Flavio for one, but he won't give him his dying wish unless we trade him a coconut. And once he gets his Diet Dr. Kelp, it turns out he's okay and joins us. But we have to go back to camp again and have to bring Flavio all the way back to the Pirate's Grotto. In between all of this, you do the same platforming sequence and bump into enemies with frantic movement patterns. Doesn't that just sound fun? There's also the infamous General White search quest, but it's clearly not intended to be good game design and meant to be a joke, so you know what, I'll give it a pass. I kinda respect developers make a game and are like, this will be mad funny. But I think the chapter that got hurt the most is Chapter 4, since I consider it to have the strongest narrative. It starts with us trying to lift a curse that's turning people into pigs, you know, usual stuff. Once we confront the prankster in charge, he turns into a clone of Mario, but we take him out with no sweat and we get the Crystal Star. So yeah, I guess that's it for this chapter. Oh shit. Mario was purple this whole time. Turns out he actually stole Mario's body during the fight, and now Mario is helpless with both his friends and his face stripped away from him. I think this is a really cool twist, and it's really stressful when you're left with nothing. Eventually he meets up with Vivian, one of the three shadows, who decides to help him since her sister Beldam is well, I think you know Veldum. I think this part is really sweet because in a way, they sort of help each other reclaim their identities. Vivian figuratively and Mario literally. It's a chapter with cool aesthetics, a great twist, and some heartfelt moments. But my god, it plays like shit. You're just constantly going back and forth between Twilight Town and Creepy Steeple, while dealing with these flower guys that make me wish I brought a weed hacker. And rather than being invested in the high stakes, I'm just begging for it to be over. And that's when you know you fucked up. And there's some other minor problems I have, like battles can have some random events that can either screw you over big time or make the battle way easier than it should be. There's this whole list of side quests you can do, but they're just not fun since meeting up with NPCs can be such a drag with how the map is designed. And while playing as Peach and Bowser between chapters is fun and all, I find that sometimes they can be a bit too long and sort of slow down the pacing. So yeah, that's why even though I like the 1000-Year Door, I didn't exactly love it. In fact, it ended up ranking number 4 in my Paper Mario game rankings. Where'd I put the rest, you ask?
I'm never telling you.
But I will at least say that I preferred the first game over the sequel by a long shot. Because although it has more interesting ideas and the combat is more fleshed out, the poor level design and exploration make it harder to appreciate, while 64 is a more well-rounded game and its downsides aren't as extreme. But you know what? I do see why others consider this to be a masterpiece, and I do see that this game has great potential. So what I think this game really needs is a second chance.
You hate roosters. I don't hate you. Hate cocks. I love.
I guess I should first explain what I see as a good or bad remake. I can mostly be able to tell from vibes, like if it really feels like they're doing the bare minimum. And even when they do make an honest attempt, they might end up changing a lot that leads to me being pretty mixed. Super Mario 64 DS, although it has its fans, I prefer the original since having 4 playable characters is cool and all, but I don't like how the abilities are distributed among the 4 of them, and it leads to them feeling pretty unbalanced, like Luigi has a level-breaking spin backflip, I'm never gonna play as Wario unless the game forces me to get a star, and Mario being the only one that can wall jump is ridiculous. Plus, the controls are not nearly as good as the N64 version, having a run button just feels so cursed. So I prefer the original Mario 64 since I want to have all these abilities at once, and the controls feel far better. But I don't see this as a bad remake because there was an honest attempt. I can see their vision of wanting to expand the original game. I still respect DS for adding new levels, creating new parts of the castle, and making a huge selection of minigames, which, let's be real, is the greatest minigames given to mankind. So even if it's not my preferred way to play Mario 64, I do see its merits. The worst kind of remake is one that feels cheap, like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I hate this game. After I'm done capturing footage, I'm throwing it in a dumpster. So I bought this remake of Pokemon Diamond with the hopes that I'll finally beat Gen 4, since I've given up multiple times due to it getting too difficult toward the end. But with the remake, I gave up because I got bored. The pacing feels just as slow in the original, and the art direction really doesn't do it for me. This whole chibi cutesy art style can look good, but here it just doesn't, and I end up preferring the pixel art from the original much better. They attempt to mimic the animations from the DS, but it just comes across as tacky. It's not terrible on its own, but it's a bad remake because it's just an attempt at making Gen 4 a second time, now with a less appealing art style and barely does anything to improve the gameplay experience. So in short, I think a good remake has to come from developers who actually give a shit. And with the announcement of the 1000-Year Door remake, it didn't seem that special to me, just looked prettier and sounded nicer. But part of me had this feeling that it'll be something more, that not only will it have a fresh coat of paint, but also fix the problems I've had with the original, so I could love this game as much as everyone else did. And so it was released on May 23rd, 2024. I played it and eventually beat it over the summer, and guys, it's peak. The Nintendo Switch version of Paper Mario The 1000-Year Door is utterly fantastic. It took a game I was very mixed on into something I can easily call amazing. And if you love the Gamecube version, this is the best thing you could have ever imagined. There were so many additions and improvements that range from the tiniest details to complete game changers. I have a huge list of things I love about this remake, but we should start with the first thing you'll notice: presentation. Now, the original doesn't look bad at all, I just think it's serviceable. It's exactly what you'd expect from Paper Mario on the Gamecube. but now that we're on the Switch, it's a huge treat to the eyes. As someone who loved Origami King's art direction with making everything paper crafted, I like how the remake took a bit of inspiration yet still keeps the overall diorama look of the original, so I think it's a good compromise of the classic and modern art direction. The lighting is really nice too. I love how the floors look all glossy from the sunlight, and I really like how the characters look, how each segment of their body is sort of their own board of paper, rather than the whole character being a paper cutout. Also, the dreaded white outline is gone. This is a big deal, apparently. But the game looking better is the least you can do for a remake. What's most important is that the gameplay holds up to modern standards. And I can safely assume that during development, they're playing certain parts of the OG game and were like, yikes. And they sought out to make these segments a much more tolerable experience. Nothing demonstrates this as well as Chapter 4. It was already the coolest looking chapter in the original, and now it's the coolest looking place I've ever seen. But despite how good it looks, I was preparing for the absolutely soul-crushing gameplay of walking through the forest 5 times. So once I discovered the body snatcher's name, I was ready to walk all the way back to town, say his full legal name and address to his face, and walk all the way back to Creepy Steeple. But on my way out, I find a block, pipe. There's now a pipe that cuts through the forest and takes you directly to town. I like Chapter 4 now. The shortcut opens up at the perfect time too. It comes in right when the backtracking gets excessive. You still need to manually head back to town when your body first gets stolen, and you still have to walk to Creepy Steeple after you get Vivian, and I think that's fine because it gives you the chance to use Vivian in battles. So the pipe ensures that you don't have to do backtracking that serves no purpose, which is great. And also, a cool touch that I did to this chapter is during the period where your body is stolen, the background music is just gone and replaced with creepy ambience. It really makes this part of the story feel a lot more surreal than it already was. Now this made me optimistic that they would make Chapter 5's backtracking less annoying as well, and lo and behold. So this is nice and all, but this brings up the question, why didn't they just redo the level design so you won't be going back and forth all the time? Well, I think then they would be changing too much of the game, and I think it's important that regardless of the original game's quality, the remake should not stray too far from it. And the backtracking is integral to the story structure of the chapters, so changing too much could lead to fans being torn on the remake, as we've seen with Mario 64 DS. So I think adding shortcuts here and there while keeping the levels themselves intact was the safest option. There's quality of life improvements everywhere throughout the remake that makes the gameplay flow a lot smoother. There's now this one room where, after getting a crystal star, it opens up a pipe to one of the areas, so you can get around much quicker. God, I need a room like this in real life. You can change the partner you have on the field much quicker now. The AI of the Walmart Pikmin are a lot smarter, whereas the original some would just stop following you if you cut corners. With the Glitz Pit battles, you need to follow certain conditions in order to rank up, and in the original, you might have forgotten what the condition was, or wondering if you're even doing it correctly. But now it shows you the condition at all times and lets you know once you pass or fail. Pretty neat. There's also this one toad you can practice battles with. Normally I wouldn't need it, but it also lets you know when to do stylish poses, and I find that to be a nice inclusion because in the original I just kinda had to guess. So yeah, I very much appreciate all these small additions that remove my annoyances from the original game. But then they went out of their way to add stuff that really didn't need to be in the game, but it adds so much charm. For starters, every character now has a voice. Kinda. You know in games like Undertale or Banjo-Kazooie where while a character's dialogue is running it plays these blips that's supposed to reflect how the character's voice sounds? Well, they did that in this remake, and now every character and type of NPC has a unique dialogue sound. I like it when games do this. I think it's a better alternative to full voice acting because most of the time, let's face it, video game voice acting is kinda cringy.
You sighed as the elevator began to shake, vibrating with motion.
So this allows the player to sort of imagine what they sound like and leaves room for their own interpretation. Honestly, most of my excitement for playing through the remake was to see what every character sounds like. Grubba's voice has been in my head rent-free for the past 3 months. They also gave characters a lot more expressions and poses that really helped give them a lot more personality. While some felt like they were needed, like your partners used to just sort of observe things with a neutral expression, now they get visibly shocked and angry. There's some that aren't necessary at all, like when you're just talking to random NPCs, but you know what? I love that. I mean, look at this guy. He's precious. It really shows the passion from the developers when they went out of their way to add nice little tidbits that they really didn't have to do. I mean, they graced us with Mario giving a thumbs up. I love how this is main way of communication and everyone just understands. They also went above and beyond for the soundtrack. But first, I have an unholy confession. I think the Thousand Year Door soundtrack was just okay.
Mods, crush the skull, thank you.
Don't get me wrong, there were some really great ones like Rogueport, Glitzville, X-Not Fortress, and the XX Express during the evening, but I couldn't help that it sounded kinda basic. I think the sound font is a bit too quirky for my liking, and some tracks felt like they were too short, making them sound sort of repetitive. Like, I couldn't remember a single track from Chapter 5. Damn, this whole chapter was kinda mid, wasn't it? But with confessing my sins out of the way, I'm happy to report that the remake soundtrack is amazing. It gives tracks that I wasn't a fan of the glow-ups they deserve, with the choice of instruments being much more my taste. I think it's mostly because it's reminiscent of Origami King's music style of big bands and zany energy, and I love that game's soundtrack, so you're more than welcome to copy that game's homework. Tracks that I was indifferent to, like Hooktail Castle, the Three Shadows boss theme, and Grubba's boss theme, got greatly improved, and I like them quite a bit now. But not only did they do the existing soundtrack justice, but they also added new ones. Many characters now have their own themes that reflect their personality quite well. Goombella's theme has a naive and adventurous feeling. While Koops' theme sounds all dopey yet sweet. I like how Koops is a bit of a goof, but he means well. And Admiral Bobbery's theme sounds like we're on our way to get the One Piece. They also added a bunch of new tracks to accompany certain events of the story. There's this one part before the championship battle in the Glitz Pit where you get locked inside the locker rooms. You have to find a way out before you miss your title match. And while it normally just played the usual Glitz Pit music, making you be all like, well damn, I guess we gotta find a way out, huh? Now it has this new stressful track that makes you all like, oh god, we gotta get out of here now. Doing something as simple as giving a cutscene its own music helps make the scene a lot more dramatic and memorable, and goes to show that the developers want to go beyond simply retelling the story and want to enhance it. Easily, my favorite part of the new soundtrack has to be the battle theme variations. It has variations. Thank God. Look, the battle theme isn't bad by any means, but it really starts to lose its charm by the time you're like halfway through the game. But this remake not only remasters it, but has a unique version depending on which area you're in, like in Origami King. We really need to normalize this because no matter how good your battle theme is, listening to the same track on and off throughout the whole game could potentially drive me mad. Anyways, I like the variations a lot. They fit the aesthetics of the area very well. Chapter 2's battle theme sounds majestic like Bogley Woods. Chapter 7 has a more somber tone and feels like you're approaching the endgame. The Moon's battle theme sounds like something straight out of Miitopia. And Chapter 6's battle theme is... Okay, you know what? I want to talk about Chapter 6 as a whole, because it was my favorite chapter in the game by far, and I want to discuss how this remake somehow made it even better.
Hey, Lois!
What?
So Chapter 6 is known as the Train Chapter. Trains are cool. And while you're on the train to Poshley Heights, you meet all these quirky passengers and help solve various mysteries. It doesn't provide nearly as good of a mystery as the Glitz Pit, but it's clear that it's less about the mystery and more about the comedy, which I think they do pretty well at. It's also a really cozy setting, especially when it's the evening or nighttime. There's no enemies on the train either, so going back and forth a lot isn't nearly as bad. But I think the chapter, and in turn the whole game, peaks at the halfway point with Riverside Station. This place has such a great atmosphere with the hazy sunset, and the place feeling pretty desolate, isolated from the rest of the world, and it feels like nobody's worked at the station for years. And the fact that there's no background music inside the station, only hearing mechanisms shift around, adds to its emptiness. The way it's decorated really shows its history. The dusty walls and the brownish color tone creates this old western aesthetic, and we all love a good Wild West theming. And if you don't, there is something wrong with you. In any case, Riverside Station just hits differently, and it's probably my favorite area in the Paper Mario series. I also love the Smorgs. They're just kind of thrown in last minute to beat the chapter's boss and can't help but find their existence hilarious. Cause like, come on, they're the Smorgs. Clearly they'll go down as one of Mario's greatest antagonists. I also find the structure of this chapter to be kinda interesting. Usually once you beat the boss you get the Crystal Star and that's it. But after beating the Smorgs, you arrive at Poshly Heights and still have a whole area to explore. And then you just grab the Crystal Star in Poshly Sanctum and that's the end of the chapter. That may sound anticlimactic, but the Sanctum is also a really cool area. It has such a surreal and magical vibe that leaves a lasting impression. This whole chapter's a vibe, kinda serves as a more laid-back adventure before you get to the higher stakes endgame. And it's because it was my favorite chapter in the original, is why I'm such a nerd for how they did it in the remake. It started off about the same, just with the perks that the remake brings, like better visuals and sound design, until I got to Riverside Station. After going inside the station, you'll notice that they really elevated the ambience. You can hear wind blowing and floorboards creaking. So as I progressed through the station, I wondered what the battle theme was gonna be. You know, for the area that has no music. Well, once you run into your first rough puff, your expectations will be shattered. This caught me so off guard, but in all the best ways. Chapter 6's battle theme is easily the best one from not only being such a jam, but from how well it's built up and subverts your expectations. Yet it fits the theme so well. After all, Riverside Station is an old-timey place, so sure, let's bring out the jazz bands, since, you know, jazz was a very popular genre in the old days. They really leaned into this early 1900s aesthetic for the whole chapter, which fits so much for Poshly Heights. As you can see, the architecture is reminiscent of what you see in the early 1900s with the fancy looking high-class buildings, and the remastered music complements this very well with the new jazzy section. Honestly, this really got me into the whole Roaring Twenties aesthetic. Makes me want to read The Great Gatsby again. So yeah, I may have dedicated a lot of time to this one chapter, but for me, this was a turning point where I went from thinking that this was a good remake to something so much more. It's when I realized that even though this was a remake of a 20-year-old game, they made it feel like a whole new experience. Now you'd think that'd be the end of it. We got beautiful visuals, an expanded soundtrack, many problems addressed, and made the good parts even better, giving us a vastly improved version of a highly beloved game. Well, guess what? That wasn't enough apparently, because on top of all of that, they added new stuff. Specifically some new bosses, one of which is Prince Mush. In case you don't know who that is, he was the first champion of the Glitz Pit who Grubba pretty much murdered, and by Mario defeating Grubba, he revived Prince Mush alongside the other missing fighters. It's a whole thing, just go with it. So after doing this quest where you collect a bunch of underwear, and after getting a few emails, you're now actually able to challenge him. Now I assumed it would be hard, but I was not expecting one of the most stacked individuals of the Paper Mario universe. He has really high defense, so you can barely do any damage without defense-piercing moves. He's constantly changing his stance to have him dodge or jump or hammer attacks. He's immune to all elements and status effects, and then he goes Super Saiyan and deals a shit ton of damage. And then eventually he locks in where you can't do any damage to him until you super guard his attack. You pretty much have to super guard or you're gonna get one hit KO'd. It makes this fight super intense and the battle music goes so hard. This is an amazing tribute to a character that, despite being important, we didn't really see that much of in the original game, but now he leaves a long-lasting impression and will go down as one of the best Paper Mario boss fights. Now this would be my favorite boss. However, there is another little surprise waiting in the Pit of 100 Trials. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention it, but the Pit of 100 Trials is basically a marathon of battles, eventually having you fight extremely difficult enemies. It's a neat endurance test, and you can do this really early into the game too. So if you're a psycho, you can take on late game enemies to get a bunch of early level ups. Now you'd normally fight Bonetail at the bottom of the pit, which is a pretty tough fight, but on the remake, once you beat him, you get news that something else lurks in the pit. So why don't we go check it out? Oh, it's Wacka. Okay, I guess we can get more Wacka's bumps now. Oh my god. They made Wacka into a boss fight. Waka, the character whose whole gimmick is getting hit on the head and making you feel bad, is a secret boss battle. This is Game of the Year. The gimmick of this fight is so clever. Every time you hit him, a bump pops out, and then Waka uses those bumps to attack you on his turn. So you have to decide if you should do less attacks at once so he has less bumps to throw at you, or go all in on attacks, but he's going to wreck your shit with all those bumps. He even gets himself hit to create more bumps. That is hysterical. This fight also heavily encourages super guards, and that makes pairing the bumps all the more exciting. The music is perfect too. It's so goofy and over the top, perfectly fitting for what you're up against. Honestly, nothing sells how amazing of a game this truly is than this work of art. But that just about wraps up my thoughts on the remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. That it might be the greatest remake for a game I've ever played. Keyword remake, and not one of the greatest games period. I still have some of the same gripes that I had with the Gamecube version, like the level design, world building, and the side quests being nothing sandwiches, but I didn't really see these getting fixed as their core parts of the game. For the most part, what could be fixed was fixed, like softening the backtracking and adding a bunch of conveniences. And on top of that, you get a massive visual overhaul, a soundtrack that went from few hits to consistent bangers, giving every character so much more personality, and adding new challenges for veteran players. It shows that this really was a passion project and not just trying to pander to Paper Mario fans' nostalgia. Okay, maybe a little bit of that, but you can just feel the passion from those who worked on this from start to finish. And because of all of this, it made me like the Thousand Year Door so much more. Also, because I started to play this game the fun way by upgrading only badge points. I used to just cycle through upgrading each stat, but when you avoid upgrading HP, it makes the game a lot more strategic. So me growing to love this game also came from me playing it the fun way, but it's mostly because the gameplay now complements the amazing narrative rather than holding it back. And judging by the sales, we might get another Paper Mario like this in the near future. And I'm hoping other games that I was a bit mixed on get a chance to get improved in every way possible. Okay, maybe not every way, the dialogue is a lot slower, which can be a bit annoying on repeat playthroughs. Okay, and the Glitzville music isn't as good. Okay, and I wish the name had a subtitle to indicate it's a remake. Here, how's this? How about Paper Mario: The 1020 Year Door? What do you mean that's dumb?
It's Mario, and he's paper